Hi everyone, my name is Sami El Geneidy and I'm a doctoral researcher, as Anja said, from University of Jyväskylä. Pleasure to meet you all, and thanks Jutta for the interesting presentation already. So basically I'm gonna talk to you a bit about biodiversity footprint assessment. What is it all about? What kind of results can we get out of a biodiversity footprint assessment? I'm going to use our university as an example, as we have piloted the results with our university. And basically, I'm also gonna just very briefly tell you a little bit about my kind of other research stream that's kind of related to integrated accounting, so how we can combine financial and environmental accounting and how that could perhaps help in the big picture. So let's go. I'm gonna go quite straight into business here. So first we have to understand what drives biodiversity loss. So what are we actually measuring when we want to measure a biodiversity footprint? We have 5 drivers of biodiversity loss as identified by the International Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES. So we have land and sea use change. We have direct exploitation of species. That could, for example, mean fishing of marine organisms from the sea. Then we have climate change. So climate change drives also biodiversity loss. We have pollution. This could mean, for example, pollution from agriculture, for example, from fertilizer use to our water ecosystems and those kind of things. And then we have invasive alien species. So we have these kind of species that we've spread. We move around the globe as humans. So we, for example, bring some species, for example, from Asia to Europe that weren't initially here, and those species can cause a lot of issues in the native species population. So these are the 5 direct drivers of biodiversity loss that we're interested in. These different drivers have effects on different ecosystem types, namely 3. So we have terrestrial ecosystems, freshwater ecosystems, and marine ecosystems. So what we want to understand is how to measure the biodiversity loss caused by these 5 drivers. All right, so how can we do that? So I have this thing called biodiversity footprint. And how I see it, we have kind of 4 distinct steps how to analyze a biodiversity footprint of an activity or product or anything. So first of all, we of course have to know the type and amount of consumption. This could mean euros of, services we buy, or kilograms of food we consume, or megawatt hours of energy that we use. And this information can, of course, be found from many different places, from financial accounting, from our energy use data, or anything like that. Then we have the type and amount of environmental impact that we have to measure. So basically, here we come to the 5 direct drivers of biodiversity loss. So for example, we have to understand that if we consume, this and this much food, how much land do we have to use? So how many square meters of land do we have to use? Or for example, what is the carbon footprint of our energy use? So we have to understand how much does it affect climate change, and so on. So we have to kind of measure and assess the type and amount of environmental impact. Then we have the location of the environmental impact, because we're talking about biodiversity, something that kind of differs a lot from carbon footprints is that biodiversity is local. So biodiversity, for example, here in Finland might be quite different from biodiversity in Germany or in Kenya or in China. So we have to understand, where does the environmental impact take place? Then finally, of course, we're not satisfied yet if we just know what is the amount of environmental impact. So if we know that we use 10 square meters of land in China, we still don't know what is the biodiversity loss caused by that environmental impact. So that's the final thing that we have to find out. What is the biodiversity loss caused by this environmental impact? I'm not gonna, because of time constraints, I'm not gonna go very deeply into the methodologies, but please, like, if you have anything to ask, I will try to answer. However, there are many multiple ways to find out, for example, this type and amount of environmental impact. And there's also already some existing databases where you can find out the information about the biodiversity loss caused by these environmental impacts in specific locations. Well, then the end product, we have different kind of units for biodiversity footprint. One that we use in my work a lot is potentially disappeared fraction of species. So this basically tells us about how much species are lost globally, potentially due to the harming activities. Then we have also other metrics. We have mean species abundance and habitat hectares, for example. All right, so let's actually now go and have a look at some of our example results. So we basically assessed the carbon and biodiversity footprint of the University of Jyväskylä. We have already published a report. It was published, I think, in 2021, and there we assessed the carbon and biodiversity footprint for the year 2019. However, the things that I'm going to present are yet, some of the results are yet unpublished. So this is because we've kind of developed the methodology further, and I wanted to give you like the best available information. However, you will find some information from this report. Unfortunately, it's in Finnish, but I don't know. Maybe you can work out some of the information with some translator. However, we will hopefully quite soon-ish publish like English scientific literature about this work as well. All right, so let's go. Here's an example result. So we have here the biodiversity footprint from 2019 to 2021 for terrestrial ecosystems. So here you see, I will take the pointer. So here you see, for example, we have all the different categories that are impacted. We see that a lot of impact comes from energy and water. We have had a lot of impact from business travel. However, it's dropped a lot. And now we see that also we have actually a rising impact for these, kind of IT supplies, machinery, equipment, and supplies, and all those kind of things. So the impacts from these are increasing all the time. And we see also a little bit here, for example, an interesting development in food and related products and services that also in 2019 we had a quite high impact, but it decreased a lot also during COVID, probably because we didn't anymore have so much on-site events where you give food to participants. So this is something you can kind of an example result of biodiversity footprint assessment. It doesn't have to be like very complicated or something very wonderful. It's just something like carbon footprint, so nothing too special. Let's have a look at another result that we can derive from these. So here is a kind of a spatial assessment, like where our biodiversity footprint is the most intensive in the world, because we consume things that have complex supply chains. And we have kind of tried to assess where the environmental impact in those supply chains happens. So where's the biggest biodiversity footprint around the globe? And here we see in the map that the redder the color, the bigger the biodiversity footprint. So for example, in Mexico, Portugal, South Africa, and Indonesia, we have the biggest biodiversity footprint of our consumption profile in 2019 for land use. And then another perhaps interesting example results. So here we have the carbon, biodiversity, and financial footprints in 2021, expressed as the relative contribution to total footprint. So these are basically percentages. So how important is each category to the respective footprint, basically? And we have here, as you can see, we have carbon footprint, the brown color. Then we have the different biodiversity footprints. So we have the terrestrial biodiversity footprint, we have the freshwater biodiversity footprint, and the marine biodiversity footprint. And finally, we also have here the financial footprint. So it's basically this dotted line thing here, you can see, like kind of above all the other bars. So a couple of perhaps interesting remarks from this figure. We see that, for example, in terms of carbon footprint, energy and water use is a very high category, and also in terms of other biodiversity footprints. However, we see that actually financially it's not such a huge cost for the university. Other interesting things we see, for example, here, then on the other hand, that these IT supplies, licenses, services contribute quite a lot in terms of cost, but a little bit less in terms of other footprints. What else? Here we see, for example, in food and related products and services, that actually the marine biodiversity footprint caused by the food products is huge. So it contributes to more than 40% of the total biodiversity footprint to the marine ecosystems. While we see that for other categories, it's actually a little bit less. All right. So then coming to the ending touches of my presentation, very shortly about integrating financial and environmental accounting, which is something that I'm researching in my doctoral thesis. So what we've tried to kind of develop is this sort of a model for combining financial and environmental accounting. So this is a very simplified impact statement of an organization. So here we have revenue, we have expenses. We could have, for example, also our own line for offsets, and then we have the net footprint. So here we have an idea that financial footprint as it is there. So we have the revenue and expenses. However, we could also have the carbon and biodiversity footprint included. And what's more kind of interesting is that we could perhaps at some point also include the handprint. So which is especially kind of important for universities, is that what we get our revenue from is basically the research and education that we do. So what could be the handprint of those? And then of course, the things that we consume, so the expenses have these footprints. So I think actually in the near future, our financial impact statement could consider already carbon and biodiversity footprint. And this could be helpful to bring kind of this consideration of environmental things to the central decision making. So these reports that our top management gets would already include carbon and biodiversity footprints, which might help them to kind of get more involved and understanding about these things as well. However, this is of course not enough. So we just bring more information to the table. I think that's in the long term, it's definitely not enough. But in the long term, we have to also think how these environmental accounts could affect the financial position of the organization. So we could use this information to transform value. And this is, of course, perhaps something for our like higher decision makers and politicians to understand how we could, for example, make taxation or anything like that based on these environmental footprints. So we actually understand financial accounting as something very static, something that's kind of given from above. But actually, if you think about it more and more, the concepts and things that we get out of financial accounting are very much up to us to decide. So how we calculate profit, how we calculate loss, how we calculate these revenue and expenses could be something completely different in the future. And finally, here are some of our like partners, collaborators, funders. Currently, regarding biodiversity footprint, one of our biggest projects is with the S Group. So S Group is one of the largest retail chains in Finland, and we're working with them to assess their whole biodiversity footprint and develop an open model for all organizations to use as well. That's it. Thanks a lot, and would be happy if we have some time to answer any questions. And I think Ulla will be presenting a bit more about also the strategic approach of University of Jyväskylä. How can we handle these issues? Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sami. That was very, very interesting. Now, again, I think we can take some questions. There's Maria, at least. Please go ahead.
Hello, it's me again. I think this is so interesting. I was wondering about the measurements that you're doing when you're combining all those financial, biodiversity, carbon, and so on. I think it's great. I also feel that we're measuring very much, but we need the measures to be able to make the right decisions, if that's possible. I was just thinking about that. How do you help the decision makers at your university to understand these kinds of figures, and how can they for real take action on it? I mean, it's quite complex, I think, but maybe Ulla is the one who's going to tell me more about it. But what are your opinions?
Yeah, thanks a lot. That's a great question, and I agree. I think Ulla is probably the better expert at that. But well, my take on that is that, yeah, I agree. It's like there's quite a lot of information, you know, coming from different directions, and it can be quite complex to understand everything. Well, first of all, I think we do need like capacity building for like top management. Like it's something that I think, even though it's maybe difficult, even though it's maybe a bit complex, I think we need to start kind of educating top management in kind of and sensitize them to this information, that they start more and more understand what is this about and why do we need to, you know, consider these things. And other aspect that I would maybe say to that is that what I kind of said in the final touches of the presentation is that that's exactly why I think we need to somehow think how these environmental footprints will affect the financial value of the financial position of the organization. Because if we can get to that position where, you know, these footprints actually have an impact on your financial position, then that's something that, you know, will definitely start to drive understanding and action also in management, I think. But definitely, I think even saying that, I think it's it's a very relevant issue and challenge that we have, that if we have to consider, and we have to consider both these carbon and biodiversity footprints, like how can we communicate it effectively and understandably?